Okay, let's just dive right into this. I want you to imagine it's the year 702 BC. The ancient world is literally trembling. The Assyrian war machine, which, by the way, was the most terrifying, unstoppable military force on the planet at that time, is just aggressively expanding its empire. They are swallowing up nations whole, and now they're marching directly toward the small kingdom of Judah. King Hezekiah and his people are in a state of absolute panic. It's a massive geopolitical crisis, right? But beneath the surface, it sets up the ultimate question for us. Where do we turn when total disaster strikes? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are breaking down the historical and spiritual crisis detailed in Isaiah chapter 30.
Now, before we get too deep into the ancient political intrigue and all the terrifying battles, we really need to establish the core spiritual thesis of this entire crisis. And this one verse just brilliantly illustrates the heart of the matter. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 15 says, "In returning and rest shall ye be saved. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength." Beautiful, right? But as we're about to see, quietness and confidence in the Lord was the absolute last thing the leaders of Judah actually wanted to do. To keep us anchored while we explore all this, let's just quickly map out how this crisis builds chronologically. In 702 BC, Hezekiah is frantically seeking an alliance with Egypt. By 701 BC, the Assyrians depart after a completely miraculous intervention. But Isaiah's prophecies don't just stop at Assyria. He looks way down the timeline to 586 BC when Babylon attacks, and even all the way to 70 AD when Rome levels Jerusalem. So Isaiah is mapping out these immediate, right-now crises alongside some very distant prophecies. So let's get into Act 1, the problem. The Assyrian war machine and the shadow of Egypt. Hezekiah is staring down this unstoppable Assyrian empire. And what does he do? Instead of trusting the prophet Isaiah, who is actively promising God's protection, Hezekiah hatches this incredibly desperate, secret plan. He secretly sends his ambassadors on this massive mission down south. Isaiah intercepts this, and in chapter 30, verse 2, the Lord just calls them out entirely, saying, "That walk to go down into Egypt, and have not asked at my mouth, to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and to trust in the shadow of Egypt." The leaders of Judah literally loaded up camels and donkeys with huge amounts of treasure to go buy military aid from Pharaoh in the Egyptian capital cities of Zoan and Hanes. They wove this whole web of double-dealing diplomacy right behind God's back. What's really fascinating here is the profound irony of Hezekiah's choice. We're looking at a direct contrast, the shadow of Egypt versus the cloud of the Lord. Think about this historically for a second. The Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt centuries prior, right? He led them with a literal cloud by day. He completely defeated Egypt with 10 plagues. Yet now, facing Assyria, Judah just ignores the God who destroyed Egypt, and they run back to hide in the shadow of Egypt for protection. It's the ultimate example of human reliance versus divine deliverance, and it was a plan destined to end in total shame. Which brings us to Act 2, the agitation, Rahab and the broken vessel. Isaiah aggressively confronts the king and his council, exposing not just the faithlessness of this secret Egyptian mission, but the sheer, terrifying foolishness of the whole thing. Isaiah paints this super vivid, kind of crazy picture of this foolish journey in verse 6, the burden of the beasts of the south. Into the land of trouble and anguish, they will carry their riches upon the shoulders of young asses. I want you to imagine these ambassadors loaded down with all of Judah's wealth, sneaking south through the blistering wilderness, completely at the peril of their own lives. I mean, look at the literal terrors they braved just to get there. The text details that they traveled through lands infested with young and old lions, deadly vipers, and what the text actually calls fiery flying serpents, which was a species of snake that would spring like a dart out of the trees onto its prey. They risked horrific deaths, basically embarking on the worst diplomatic road trip in human history, just to hand over their riches to a people who would end up offering zero military profit. Because honestly, what actually was the strength of Egypt? Isaiah uses this really fascinating word in verse 7. He calls Egypt Rahab. Now, Rahab was a mythological sea dragon, symbolizing insolent arrogance. The history here is so interesting. Egypt is basically being called a puffed-up monster, whose only actual strength is to sit still. In modern terms, they were all hat and no cattle. Even the Assyrians knew this. They mocked Egypt as a broken reed that would just pierce the hand of anyone who tried to lean on it. But, the rebellious people of Judah, they didn't want to hear this. They did not want the truth. In verse 10, their attitude toward Isaiah is just laid completely bare. Prophecy not unto us right things, speak unto us smooth things, prophesy deceits. They basically told Isaiah to shut up and get out of the way. They wanted comfortable lies. They wanted to be told that their money and their brand new Egyptian alliance was going to save them from the Assyrian war machine.
So here's the crucial point. Isaiah has to drop a really terrifying prophecy on them. Because they trusted in corruption, their entire nation would shatter. Verse 14 reads, "And he shall break it as the breaking of the potter's vessel that is broken in pieces. He shall not spare." He's warning them that Jerusalem will be completely leveled. And this perfectly foreshadowed their utter destruction by Babylon in 586 BC and later by Rome in 70 AD, where the city was smashed so completely there literally wasn't a shard left big enough to scoop water from a puddle. This brings up a really desperate reality and a harsh challenge for those ancient Judahites. Where exactly will you flee to when the walls fall? They arrogantly told Isaiah, "No, we won't rest in the Lord. We're going to flee upon swift horses." But Isaiah reminds them, yeah, your pursuers will simply be swifter. When Babylon finally breached the walls, King Zedekiah tried to flee by night, but he was chased right down in the plains of Jericho. When Rome laid siege in 70 AD, hundreds tried to escape the starvation inside the walls every single day, only to be captured instantly. The resulting panic of this is described in verse 17 with just incredible hyperbole. 1,000 shall flee at the rebuke of one, till ye be left as a beacon upon the top of a mountain and as an ensign on an hill. Because they lost God's protection, the fear of just one single enemy soldier would send 1,000 fleeing in terror. A once mighty, forest-like nation would be reduced to a solitary stripped pine tree on a mountain or a tattered flag flapping on a hill. It is a stark, undeniable warning of divine judgment. But here is where the whole narrative shifts dramatically. Act 3, the solution. The call to return and days of grace. Despite their rebellion, all their double-dealing, and their outright rejection of his warnings, God still offers a path back to peace. Look at the profound patience displayed in verse 18. "And therefore will the Lord wait, that he may be gracious unto you, and therefore will he be exalted, that he may have mercy upon you." Yes, the Assyrians are coming, absolutely, but God delays the final total destruction of Jerusalem to give Judah a day of grace. He desperately wants to show mercy to those who will just patiently wait for him. And if they wait, they are given this incredible promise of guidance in verse 21. "And thine ears shall hear a word behind thee, saying, This is the way, walk ye in it." The Holy Spirit will actively direct their paths. And the immediate result of this spiritual return? They will take their precious idols, these graven images they'd overlaid with expensive silver and gold, and they'll throw them away like a polluted, filthy cloth, literally telling them, "Get out of here." And this brilliant spiritual return, it's followed by just pure physical euphoria. Isaiah paints a picture of miraculous provision. After the horrific trauma and the starvation of the impending siege, God promises rain in its season, plentiful bread, and massive pastures. The abundance is going to be so extreme that even the lowly oxen pulling the plows in the fields are going to eat top-tier winnowed grain. It's a total, complete restoration of prosperity. Okay, but to get to that piece, the immediate threat still has to be dealt with, right? And that brings us to the explosive climax, the fall of Assyria. The Egyptians aren't going to save Judah. Instead, God is going to take matters into his own hands and deal personally with the Assyrian war machine. God allows Assyria to act as this rod of judgment up to a very specific point. Verse 28 describes the Assyrian army as an overflowing stream that reaches right up to the midst of the neck, meaning they flood the entire nation of Judah right up to the very walls of the capital, Jerusalem. But right at the neck, God steps in. He puts a bridle in their jaws. He turns them around to wander right back to their own lands. And how does he actually do it? Verse 30 tells us the Lord will cause his glorious voice to be heard, unleashing the furious, uncontrollable powers of nature, devouring fire, scattering tempests, and hailstones. Historically, it's actually recorded that an angel of the Lord destroyed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in a single night, right outside Jerusalem. The Assyrians, who spent decades viciously beating down the nations, are violently beaten down themselves by the voice of the Lord. The judgment here is absolute. It's terrifying. Isaiah reveals in verse 33 that God has prepared a specific place of torment for the Assyrian king. For Tophet is ordained of old, he hath made it deep and large. The pile thereof is fire and much wood. The breath of the Lord like a stream of brimstone doth kindle it.
To really grasp the severity of this, we have to understand what Tophet actually was. Tophet was located in the Valley of Hinnom, just outside Jerusalem. It was a place of perpetual burning fires, historically associated with the abhorrent, idolatrous sacrifices of children to the fire god Moloch. It was a site of ultimate defilement and horror. Isaiah is using Tophet as an emblem of absolute fiery destruction. The breath of the Lord himself kindles the fire that entirely consumes the Assyrian threat.
Hezekiah thought his survival depended on this secret diplomacy, wasting his treasures to go hide in the shadow of a puffed-up Egyptian monster that would do absolutely nothing but sit still. But true deliverance, it only came when God stepped in with fire and tempest. It really forces us to evaluate our own reliance on human solutions today. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. When the terrifying war machines of life inevitably arrive at your door, whose shadow are you trusting in? Are you looking for smooth things and deceit, or are you waiting in quiet confidence for the cloud of the Lord? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep seeking the truth.